అందరికీ సుందర విజ్ఞాన కేంద్రం తరఫున స్వాగతం. ఈరోజు మనం ప్రధానంగా అఫ్ఘాన్ పరిణామాల గురించి మాట్లాడుకుందాం. అందులో కేవలం అఫ్ఘాన్ పరిణామాలే కాదు, మొత్తం జో బైడెన్ విదేశాంగ విధానం ఎట్లా ఉంటుంది అనేటువంటి అంశాన్ని మనం చర్చించాల్సి ఉంటుంది. జో బైడెన్ వచ్చిన తర్వాత ఈ ఇంటర్నేషనల్ పాలసీలో మిగతా అంశాల్లో కొన్ని తేడాలు వస్తాయి, మార్పులు జరుగుతాయి అని ఆశించిన వాళ్ళకి ఈ అఫ్ఘాన్ నుంచి వాళ్ళు విత్డ్రా కావటం అనేటువంటిది అటువంటి భ్రమల్ని పటాపంచలు చేసి, నిజానికి ఈ పాలసీ విత్డ్రావల్ పాలసీ అనేటువంటిది ట్రంప్ పీరియడ్ లో రూపొందించింది. ఈయన ఎగ్జాక్ట్ గా అదే విత్డ్రావల్ పాలసీని ట్రంప్ విడిచిన చెప్పుల్లో తన కాళ్ళు దూర్చి ఇప్పుడు ఆఫ్ఘనిస్తాన్ నుంచి ఫోర్సెస్ ను విత్డ్రా చేసుకుంటున్నాడు. ఇట్లా విత్డ్రా చేసే ముందు దాని పరిణామాలు ఎట్లా ఉంటాయి అనేటువంటి అంశాన్ని జో బైడెన్ పట్టించుకోలేదు. అందువల్ల ఇప్పుడు మనం ఒక పెద్ద సంక్షోభాన్ని ఆఫ్ఘనిస్తాన్ లో పరిసర దేశాల్లో కూడా చూస్తున్నాం. చుట్టుపక్కల ఉండేటువంటి దేశాలన్నీ కూడా అక్కడ ఏం జరుగుతుంది, అక్కడ ఇండియన్స్ ఉన్నారు, పాకిస్తానీలు ఉన్నారు, మిగతా అనేక దేశాలకు సంబంధించినటువంటి మనుషులు ఉన్నారు, సాంకేతిక నిపుణులు ఉన్నారు, వీళ్ళంతా ఏమిటి అనేటువంటిది ఒక పెద్ద సమస్యగా ఉంది. అదే కాకుండా గతంలో ఉన్నట్టుగా మూర్ఖమైనటువంటి పద్ధతుల్లో తాలిబాన్ లేదు అని అనుకుంటున్నప్పటికీ దాన్ని ఎంత నమ్మాలో అనేది ఎవరికి అర్థం కావట్లేదు. చాలా తలపడినటువంటి దౌత్యవేత్తలకు కూడా ఈ తాలిబాన్ ఎటువంటి షేప్ తీసుకుంటుంది అనేటువంటిది అర్థం కానటువంటి విషయంగా ఉంది. సరే, తాలిబాన్తో ఎటువంటి సంబంధాలు పెట్టుకోవాలి అనేటువంటిది కూడా ఇప్పటికీ మన గవర్నమెంట్ కూడా డిసైడ్ చేయలేదు. గతంలో జాన్ ఎఫ్ కెనడీ అధ్యక్షుడైనప్పుడు కూడా ఇటువంటిదే జరిగింది. ఆయన అధ్యక్షుడు కాగానే క్యూబాలో ఉండేటువంటి బే ఆఫ్ పిగ్స్ మీద దాడి చేశాడు, చొరవ అంటే దాడి చేసి దాన్ని ఇది చేశాడు. ఈయన ఎగ్జాక్ట్ అదే కానీ విత్డ్రా చేసుకున్నాడు, ఆయన దాడి చేశాడు. ఆయన కూడా గత ప్రభుత్వం నిర్ణయం చేసిందో దాన్ని అమలు చేశాడు. ఇప్పుడు ఈయన కూడా ఇదే చేస్తున్నాడు. ఇది ఒక విధంగా మిగతా ప్రభుత్వాలకు కూడా, ఎవరైతే అమెరికా మిత్రులు అనేటువంటి ప్రభుత్వాలు ఉన్నాయి, యూకే కానీ, ఫ్రాన్స్ కానీ, జర్మనీ కానీ, ఇవన్నీ కూడా పూర్తిగా చర్చించి చేశాడా, సమీక్షించి చేశాడా అనేటువంటి అనుమానాలు వ్యక్తం చేస్తున్నట్లుగా మనకు పత్రికల్లో వార్తలు వస్తున్నాయి. ఏమైనా ఇది ఒక విపరీతమైనటువంటి పరిణామము. అక్కడి నుంచి విత్డ్రా అవుతే, అమెరికన్ ఫోర్సెస్ విత్డ్రా అవుతే వెంటనే తాలిబాన్లు ప్రవేశిస్తారు కాబుల్లోకి, వాళ్ళు ప్రభుత్వాన్ని హస్తగతం చేసుకుంటారు అనేటువంటిది మనకు వాళ్ళకి అంచనా ఉండాలి. అంచనా ఉన్నా కూడా ఇవన్నీ పట్టించుకోలేకుండా విత్డ్రా చేశారు. ఒక్కసారిగా విత్డ్రా చేయడంతో వాళ్ళు క్రమక్రమంగా కాబుల్ దాకా వచ్చేసి ప్రభుత్వాన్ని స్వాధీనం చేసుకున్నారు. అక్కడ ఉన్నటువంటి ప్రెసిడెంట్ అన్సారీ ఘనీ, అన్సారీ కాదు, అష్రఫ్ ఘనీ వాడు పలాయనం చిత్తగించేశాడు, యుఏకి వెళ్ళిపోయాడు. ఇక్కడ ప్రజలు ఏమవుతారు, అఫ్ఘాన్ల పట్ల తనకేం బాధ్యత లేదా అన్నట్టుగా జో బైడెన్ ఎట్లా చేశాడో ఇతను కూడా అదే పద్ధతుల్లో చేసినట్టుగా మనకు కనపడుతుంది. ఇది ఆయన జో బైడెన్ అధికారంలోకి రాగానే ఒక విషయం చేశారు. అదేంటంటే, ప్రపంచంలో డెమోక్రసీస్ ను ఎస్టాబ్లిష్ చేయడానికి మేము రష్యాకు చైనాకు వ్యతిరేకంగా పోరాడతాం, అక్కడ డెమోక్రసీ తెస్తాము అని చెప్పాడు. మరి ఇక్కడ ఇది ఏం డెమోక్రసీ ఏమిటి అనేటువంటిది మనం పరిశీలించుకోవాల్సినటువంటి అవసరం. ఒక ఫండమెంటలిస్ట్ ఫోర్సెస్ ని అక్కడ అధికారంలోకి వచ్చేటట్టుగా చేశారు. సో వీటన్నింటి మీద ఈరోజు మనం చర్చిస్తున్నాము. అమెరికా విదేశాంగ విధానము, దాని ప్రభావం ప్రపంచం మీద, దాని ప్రభావం ఏమిటి అనేటువంటిది చర్చిస్తున్నాం. దీనికి లెఫ్ట్ వార్డ్ చీఫ్ ఎడిటర్ అయినటువంటి ప్రొఫెసర్ విజయ్ ప్రసాద్ గారు, ఆయన యుఎస్ నుంచి ఇప్పుడు మాట్లాడుతున్నారు. ఆయన ఈ విదేశీ దౌత్య వ్యవహారాలు వీటన్నింటిలో మంచి నిపుణుడు. ఎప్పటికప్పుడు ఆయన స్టడీ చేస్తాడు, అనేక పుస్తకాలు కూడా రచించారు. కనుక ఆయన ప్రసంగాన్ని మనం విందాం. ముందు 45 నిమిషాల పాటు ఆయన ప్రసంగిస్తారు. కామ్రేడ్ వీరయ్య దాన్ని తెలుగులోకి అనువదిస్తారు. ఆ తర్వాత ప్రసంగం తర్వాత ఎవరికైనా ఏమైనా ప్రశ్నలు ఉంటే ఆ ఫేస్బుక్ కామెంట్ మీద మీ ప్రశ్నలు నమోదు చేస్తే వాటికి కూడా విజయ్ ప్రసాద్ గారు సమాధానాలు ఇస్తారు. నౌ ఐ రిక్వెస్ట్ కామ్రేడ్ విజయ్ ప్రసాద్ టు టేక్ మైక్.
Comrade, it's a pleasure to be with you at Nava Telangana for many reasons. One is that, I am happy to say that Leftward has republished an Ejaz Ahmed title on imperialism, and I know that Nava Telangana has a terrific collection from Ejaz on the current world situation. So I'm happy to mention that book again, and I know I'm soon going to publish a review of it. This is a public a commitment. I know that. Coming to that. The second thing is that, we have in the left movement in India now 100 years old, several important leaders, theorists, thinkers, and there's been a lack of study around the country, in my feeling, of some of these very original thinkers. People know the work of EMS, people know about Sundaraiah, Comrade Sundaraiah, but their work is not often studied very much. So the second reason I'm so happy is that, the work done by Sundaraiah Vijnana Kendram is so important to put forward the theory developed by some of the early communist figures in India. Paying attention to the left praxis, the left theory in our context is very important. And today I'm going to talk a little bit briefly about the Afghan communists. Just as there is a lack of knowledge around the world of the theories of Comrade Sundaraiah, there is a lack of understanding of the theories of the Afghan communists. And a view is put forward of Afghanistan as a so-called backward place. And I want to challenge that a little bit today as we talk about this US defeat at the hands of the Taliban. I'm going to take this time to talk about 4 different things. The first is the US defeat. The second is the US-NATO war. The third is the history of Afghanistan in the current period. And the fourth is the geopolitics around this conflict. These will be the 4 aspects that I'll spend some time on. So the first part on defeat, I've written about this in the current issue in People's Democracy. So you can go and see some of this in that article in the party paper. The United States has fought 3 major wars in the last 20 years and has been defeated in each of these wars. The first war was in Afghanistan. The US started to bomb Afghanistan in October 2001, and now in August 2021, 20 years later, the US has had to withdraw. The US went to that war to remove the Taliban from power, and now the Taliban are back. This is a very elementary defeat. How do you define defeat? This is a defeat. Number 1, war. About 2 years into the Afghan war, the war on Afghanistan, the United States started a war against Iraq in March of 2003. In 2011, the Iraqi parliament refused to allow US troops to operate on Iraqi soil unless they came under Iraqi law. Now, not only did the Iraqi parliament essentially eject US troops from most of Iraq, but also the Iraqi government has closer ties to Iran than they have to Washington, D.C. Now, it's also true that in northern Iraq, near Kirkuk and so on, United States maintains a military presence. But this is an arrangement with the Kurdish Autonomous Region. Iraq War has been a defeat for the United States. It was not able to produce a pro-Western government. And the third war in 2011, United States and NATO went to war against Libya, destroyed Libyan institutions. At the end of the war, roughly 2011, left behind a chaotic country where the Turkish government, the United Arab Emirates, Saudi Arabia are dominant. The United States has no role there. They don't even have a real embassy. The three wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, three defeats for the United States. Okay, so these three defeats in Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan demonstrate that despite the fact that the United States continues to have the most powerful military, it has the largest base structure, it has the most lethal weaponry. Despite all that, it doesn't have the political capacity to win a war. We should make a distinction between this. United States can bomb any country, obliterate any city, but that doesn't mean it can win a war. Wars are not won by military force alone. Wars are won politically. And the United States never won the Iraq war, the Libya war, or the war against Afghanistan politically in the same way as the US has suffered defeats in Venezuela, in Bolivia, and in Cuba. You must understand the difference between overwhelming military power and the slow attrition of US political authority. We are seeing the attrition of US political authority, but thus far we are not seeing any decrease in the lethality, the lethalness of US military power. I think what these wars have shown us is the fragility of US political authority. But we should not underestimate the power of the United States to continue to hammer at countries through various hybrid war technologies. So let's now turn to the war itself. We've dealt with the defeat, but I want to be clear that it's a political defeat. It's an ideological defeat. It's not necessarily a defeat of US military power. The reason I want to say that is the United States bombed Afghanistan and destroyed most of its remaining infrastructure. What the Taliban have inherited is a very poor country with an infrastructure that has been relatively destroyed. I want to underline that point, that this was a political and ideological defeat. But we should not see this as the weakness of US military power. Tomorrow the United States can fire up their jet planes and go and bomb another country and create great destruction. There is no real shield in the world today against US imperialism. However much Russia and China exert themselves, they are not a full shield against US imperialism. And I think we need to be very precise in our understanding of this as a political defeat, not as a catastrophic defeat of the US military. Go ahead. So what is this war? In October 2001, the United States decided to enter Afghanistan with two objectives. Number one, to destroy Al-Qaeda. Number two, to destroy the Taliban. Now, the Taliban government itself in September, October 2001 said that they were willing to hand over Osama bin Laden and the Taliban to a third country pending a warrant and a file which contained evidence of their role in the attack on the United States. Taliban had made this very clear. They were willing to hand over bin Laden, but to a third country for a trial and investigation and so on. Before that attack on the United States, the Chinese, 5 Central Asian countries had created the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. They were trying to put pressure on the Taliban to stop terrorist activities and to moderate their government. There had already been a lot of pressure before October 2001 on the Taliban. United States disregarded that pressure and disregarded the Taliban offer and went for a full-scale war. Right when that war was going on, I wrote a book called War Against the Planet, which Leftward has now reissued. One of the points I made in this book was that the United States war aims were not clear. On the one side, the US government said we want to destroy the Al-Qaeda organization. But Al-Qaeda very quickly left Afghanistan, went into Pakistan, went to the Arab world, particularly into North Africa, went to parts of other parts of Asia, including in Central Asia and so on. Al-Qaeda left Afghanistan within months, and even bin Laden left Afghanistan and was in Pakistan, in Abbottabad, where he was killed in 2011, 10 years after that war began. So the first objective, destroy Al-Qaeda, didn't actually happen. Al-Qaeda left. And Al-Qaeda became different. It became ISIS, it created chaos in Syria and so on. So there was no real immediate defeat of Al-Qaeda, and I must say, people should not believe Al-Qaeda has disappeared from the planet. It is tormenting people in North Africa, in West Africa and Nigeria, in Syria and so on. It still operates. Secondly, the Taliban. Taliban wasn't defeated. In fact, Mullah Baradar, the current head of the Taliban, took Mullah Umar on a motorcycle off to Pakistan, and Taliban regrouped. Every summer since 2002, every summer, the Taliban has returned to create a lot of problems, first for the United States, NATO, and then for whatever government was there in Kabul. So the Taliban was not defeated, nor was Al-Qaeda really defeated. And George W. Bush, the president of the United States, kept saying, we are not going to do nation building. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but what are you doing then? If you occupy a country for 20 years, what are you doing if you're going to spend $2 trillion on that country? What are you doing if not nation building? So the United States from the beginning had an incoherent political objective, which it was not able to meet. So the United States spent $2.3 trillion US dollars on something. They said they are not nation building, but they spent $2.3 trillion US dollars. That's a lot of money. $88 billion was spent on building the Afghan National Army. $88 billion. Now, 20 years have gone by. Here are the latest statistics. Pay attention to these. These are important. Number one, in these 20 years, the number of Afghans living in poverty has doubled in these 20 years. Secondly, more than 1/3 of Afghans struggle with hunger. Thirdly, half of Afghans have no drinking water. Fourthly, 2/3 of Afghans have no electricity. 2/3 of Afghans have no electricity. And finally, in this period, poppy cultivation has tripled. Now, 2.3, $2.2 trillion spent on Afghanistan by the United States government. The social condition of the people is terrible at the end of this 20-year occupation. Secondly, you spent $88 billion building a military of 300,000. When the Taliban started to advance earlier this year, that military just disappeared. In fact, a US government study from 2016 found that among the 300,000 troops, Afghan National Army troops, 42,000 were so-called ghost soldiers. They didn't exist. Somebody was taking their salaries as corruption. The US government found the level of corruption by US contractors, European contractors, and Afghan officials was extremely high. Comrades, Bush said we are not nation building, but they spent $2.3 trillion in these 20 years. The condition of the Afghan people has deteriorated in these 20 years. Basic point is, imperialism is not interested in the well-being of people. They could have taken those $2.3 trillion and improved the condition of people. And maybe then people would not have supported the Taliban when they rushed through the country over the course of this year. But the Afghan National Army and the US imperialists had no credibility. And so they were swept away without a fight almost by the Taliban. So, where does one even begin with the story of Afghanistan? This is now part 3 on the great social struggle. The British fought 2 wars against Afghanistan in the 19th century. And the British lost part of the wars, won part of the wars. But they created 2 stereotypes about Afghanistan, which I want to put back on the table. The first stereotype they put on the table is that the Afghan people are resistant to change. That the Afghan people are backward, conservative, against any modern development. This was one stereotype the British put on the table. It's not true at all, as I will show you. The second stereotype they put on the table is that Afghanistan is the graveyard of empires. This phrase is used a lot. But that's not even true. Because in the Second Afghan War, 1878 to 1880, the British actually won the war because they got their objectives. They were able to dominate Afghan political society for almost 40 years. So these are 2 important stereotypes that you will see now being used. One, well, the Afghan people are backward. That's just who they are. And secondly, that it's the graveyard of empire. So you don't need to worry about this defeat. It's not the United States that was defeated. It's that Afghanistan is impossible to conquer. These are 2 stereotypes that come from the 19th century, when the British went and conducted 2 very ruthless wars, the first Afghan war and the second Afghan war. So, in that sense, we have to be careful not to fall into the stereotype of saying Afghanistan is backward, or that this is not really a defeat for the United States. It's actually just the Afghans again defeating invaders. So, Afghanistan actually has its own history. It doesn't have a history that's only about what the imperialists did. It has its own history. In 1911, a very important Afghan intellectual, Muhammad Tarzi, who had been exiled with his family to the Ottoman Empire, returned to Kabul and started a magazine, the Torchlight magazine, in which he raised a number of interesting issues of social reform. Mahmud Tarzi's family was close to the king of Afghanistan, Habibullah. In fact, Tarzi and Asma Khanum, who was born in Syria and had married Mahmud Tarzi, their daughter Suraya married the son of the king, King Habibullah. The son of the king becomes the next king in 1919. His name is Amanullah. And they open a period of social reform, including girls' education and so on. This starts independent of the imperialists. This starts because the Afghan people understand their own trajectory of social development. From the rule of Amanullah, 1919, right up to the execution of Muhammad Najibullah, the last communist president of Afghanistan in 1996. From 1919 to 1996, almost 80 years, there was a long dynamic of social transformation in Afghanistan, including the writing of 4 constitutions from 1923 to 1990. Sorry, 5 constitutions. 64, 73, 87, 1990. 5 constitutions were written that advanced the goals of equality, justice, and so on. This dynamic precedes the communists, starts long before the communists emerge in Afghanistan. And it's rooted in Afghan society. It's not alien to Afghan society. So that's the first point about Afghanistan I want to make here, is Afghanistan has its own history of reason and equality and justice. So in the 1960s, the communists in Afghanistan started to play a very important role alongside the elites, liberals and others, to build a mass agenda for social reform. The previous social reform agenda was largely an elite agenda, starting girls' education in Kabul, women into government service, and so on. The communists deepened the social reform agenda with 2 principal demands. First, land reform. Second, mass literacy. And in mass literacy, emphasis was placed on women's emancipation. Our comrade Anahita Ratebzad founded the Organization of Democratic Women, which played a key role in fighting for literacy, land reform, women's emancipation. These were, in a sense, the 3 pillars of the communist struggle in the 1960s and in the 1970s. And the communists had a big influence on the liberal government of Muhammad Dawood, who was there in 1973. Communists had a big influence in that government, pushing it to adopt parts of the communist agenda. Again, mass literacy, land reform, and women's emancipation. So in 1978, when the communists felt that the liberal government was not advancing the goals of the Afghan people, they took power in April in the Saur Revolution and immediately pushed for land reform, mass literacy, women's emancipation. In fact, 18,000 mass literacy workers went into the countryside to break the back, essentially, of illiteracy. I mean, I want to say quite clearly that when the communists came to power, the literacy rate in Afghanistan was 18.6%. You can't advance the social goals of a population if they are struggling with illiteracy. That's why 18,000 literacy workers, most of them communists, went to the countryside to teach people reading, writing, rationality. And that was an enormous agenda point for the communists. They also put forward directly the rights of women to full equality, equality in marriage, equality in work, and so on. It was a very advanced agenda. But this agenda came out of a history in Afghanistan that starts in 1911. It's wrong to say the communists imposed an agenda on Afghanistan. That agenda had already been there for 60 years before the communists came to power in April of 1978. There was a constituency inside Afghanistan for that agenda. So the conservative right-wing sections fled Afghanistan. In fact, it's important to point out that Burhanuddin Rabbani, for instance, left Afghanistan during the reign of Muhammad Dawood, who was going to arrest Rabbani, because Rabbani was a right-wing reactionary whose people were attacking women in the universities. He was a professor of theology at Kabul University. He had already left for Peshawar in exile before the communist coup. It's important to point that out because it's not that the communists created these right-wing people. They were there before. When the communists came to power in 78, even more of these right-wing left for Pakistan. And they would have been a footnote in history, Comrade Biraya. They would have been a footnote in history. At that point, 1978, there was a military dictatorship in Pakistan, Zia-ul Haq, fully backed by the US imperialists. There was Saudi petro money. These three things came together: Saudi petro money, US imperialists, and the military dictatorship in Pakistan. They fully backed these marginal gangsters sitting in Peshawar and so on, rebranded them as the Mujahideen, army of God, nothing God about them. And they then came with the full force of the United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia to attack the communist government. At that point, the communist government begged the Soviet Union to enter. The Soviet Union took about 8 months before they decided very reluctantly to come into the country, didn't want to come. That was perhaps a mistake. But the government in Kabul was under enormous pressure. And this right-wing section that comes in against the government in Kabul in 79, this right-wing section is what becomes the Mujahideen. Out of them will emerge, by the way, the Taliban, the Northern Alliance, and now the Taliban, Hamid Karzai, Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, Abdullah, and so on.
Yes, come.
So there was nothing inevitable about this kind of right-wing government or right-wing political forces triumphing in Afghanistan. There was nothing inevitable. It has been a long contest since the 1910s between the forces of reform, which included liberal aristocrats, the emerging middle class, communists leading the peasantry, and so on. And on the other side, the reactionaries, sections of landlords, the conservative clergymen, and in a sense, committed, hardcore reactionary types that were there in the university and so on. But it's a combination of landlords, clergy, and these reactionaries that formed a bloc that, with the help of the United States, Pakistan, and Saudi Arabia, prevailed. And they have helped destroy a long process of struggle in Afghanistan. They, who is they? Those who gave the right wing the advantage. And that's US imperialism primarily. US imperialism never went there to fight the Taliban or anything like that. They went there to fight their adversaries, not to bring the good side of history to life in Afghanistan. Please don't misunderstand this point. What we have now with the US defeat in Afghanistan, the US was defeated by its former allies. That's how we have to see it. And the scope for the good side of Afghan history is just not there right now. So the last point. There is no positive outcome here. This is not a moderate Taliban. Mullah Baradar, who is going to be in power, was one of the founders of the Taliban. This might be a pragmatic Taliban, but it's not a moderate Taliban. It's not moderate because it will not moderate its social agenda. People are misled. Spokespersons are saying women can go out but only following Islamic law. They said the same thing in the 1990s. It's not a moderate Taliban. It's a pragmatic Taliban. It's pragmatic because their old ally Pakistan, for instance, is now very much in an alliance with China. And China cannot permit the growth of terrorism, especially against Xinjiang province. And China cannot permit the disruption of its Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, the only possibility for some decency right now is Chinese and Pakistani pressure on the Taliban to act pragmatically. But this does not mean they will moderate their agenda. India, the Central Asian countries, Iran, are playing a role in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, again to moderate or make the Taliban pragmatic. This is important. The other road for Afghan freedom is not going to open up through the Panjshir Valley, where a handful of people have gone to try to continue the war. The Afghan people don't want the war to continue. New politics has to emerge in Afghanistan. The old dynamic of social reform has to be revived in mass movements. And this is not an idealistic thing. There are elements of this that are there. Already we have seen protests on the streets of Afghanistan. They will have to coalesce into movements. The gun may not be the solution for Afghanistan. Politics may be the solution. And we have to hope, comrades, that Chinese and Pakistani pressure, also pressure from the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, is going to keep the Taliban pragmatic, and that the Taliban will not by force resist the emergence of mass movements. This kind of fascistic politics of the Taliban will not be defeated on the battlefield. It has to be defeated in the hearts and minds of people. It's a long struggle that will open up for the Afghan people. But remember, they've been struggling for 100 years already. It's a long struggle. They will fight their struggle. They are a brave people. They have a tradition of social reform. We should count on them. We should give them solidarity.
There are 2-3 questions. One is, what should be India's approach in this background?
So, the Indian External Affairs Minister is part of the Afghanistan contact group of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. And he was in Dushanbe in July of this year, where he put forward a 3-point program. This is before Taliban came to power, but they already knew Taliban was coming. They asked for the Taliban to be pragmatic. They asked for the Taliban not to interfere in neighboring countries, to promote terrorism and so on. And they asked the Taliban to respect minorities and so on inside the country, to moderate the agenda. That was the 3-point program. It was basically endorsed by Pakistan, China, Iran, and others. India has to play a role, I suppose, strengthening the political positions of people like Hamid Karzai, Abdullah, who are inside Kabul, who are negotiating with the government. Look, the way forward now has to be a government of national reconciliation or something like that. That's the best you can expect, not a narrow Taliban government. If the Taliban can feel pressure from China, India, and so on to build a national reconciliation government, that will be a great advance for Afghanistan. Somehow I doubt they will accept it, comrade. But India has to continue to work with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, has to use the Afghanistan issue as a way to create better, closer relations with, to actually work with Pakistan and China on this. There is only the regional solution. You can't expect the UN to get involved or the US government. So India, Pakistan, China, Iran, the 5 Central Asian countries have to put pressure on the politics of Afghanistan to create a government of national reconciliation. In the US, they're worried about their own people inside Kabul, inside Afghanistan, and they're trying to evacuate them. So they are right now not making any public declarations. They don't want to jeopardize the evacuation. Once the evacuation is completed, let's see what they do. I mean, I mentioned the Panjshir Valley and the former Vice President, Amrullah Saleh. He was the spy chief of the government of the United States in Afghanistan from 2004 to 2010. Mr. Saleh was the spy chief. He worked very closely with the CIA and so on. His credibility in Afghanistan is not very high. He was the US man in Ashraf Ghani's government. You know, that he's gone off to Panjshir Valley with the son of Ahmad Shah Massoud. It should not give people false understanding. They don't have a mass base. Their base will now be the bombers of the United States. And so I don't know exactly what the other US allies will do, but we'll have to wait and see.
Okay, thank you, Comrade Vijay Prasad garu. It was very elaborate and new points have come up. And so most of this generation people do not know what is Afghan history. So what you said, uncivilized country, that was the only impression these generations have. I have attended the press conference of Afghan Communist Party leaders that time, somewhere in 1980s. So they were, we can't expect how Afghan turned into like this situation. So anyhow, thank you. ఈ కార్యక్రమాన్ని చూసినందుకు నమస్కారం.